Hi, this is an informal taping of the Snyder family. I'm going to explain what we're doing here and things surrounding this event. This is Burbank, California, in Matthew Snyder's studio. Matt's downstairs, and Brent's downstairs, and Mark's downstairs. Thanks. And this is Milton Snyder. I'm Craig Snyder. And this is April 3rd, 2011. And basically a memoir of Milton Snyder's life and the family he created. We're all here in Burbank. Never thought this would actually happen. We've talked about this for a couple of years, and it just seemed like, hey, yeah, let's do that. It sounds like a great idea. And here we are. So we want to speak informally. We want to talk about family. We want to talk about things that we would like to ask, or we've thought about asking for a long time, and maybe 20 years from now would like to have asked later on. I'm going to start with just describing what my process is as far as genealogy goes. And I've, for the last 10 years, have been turned on to family genealogy. I don't know where it came from, but I think it has to do somewhat with Marie Sterling, my grandmother, Nana, talking about her family the whole time we were growing up. It was about the Pritchards, about the Snyders, about the Jordans, about the Coopers, and talking about family. And I have to admit, I was totally confused my entire childhood because everyone had such different names, and you wouldn't necessarily meet these people. So in 1999 or so, there was an article in Time magazine where they talked about finding your ancestors online through FamilySearch.com and other locations. And I started kind of putting together a family tree. It started with about 10 names that I could remember. And I wrote them down on a piece of paper. I still have it on my wall in my office in Bellingham. And to this day, I now have about 22,000 names in my database of family members I've linked together on a family file. And most people think I've gone over the deep end when they know that I've handwritten every single one of those into a file. But I feel like it's kind of a calling from my ancestors, calling from my past to say there's stories that are there that are unspoken at this point. We don't know what a lot of those stories are. Unless you speak them, unless you write them down, unless you talk to other people about them, they're gone forever. And I feel this special calling from the past to tell the stories about events that are long gone and people who have lived and breathed on this planet and lived their life, loved, got married, had children, and passed their family down to where we are today. I have a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that I think sums it up really well about how I feel about genealogy and about my family. And it says, "In different hours, a man represents each of several of his ancestors, as if there were 7 or 8 of us rolled up in each man's skin. 7 or 8 ancestors at least, and they constitute the variety of notes for that new piece of music which his life is." I'm going to lead right now into talking to Milton Snyder, and I'm going to hit him to give kind of a background on his book and why he chose to write it.
Thank you, Craig. The book, well, probably one of the most important things I've ever done. All the schooling that we've all been into and so on, but the 15 years of following up on the research and so on was important. Well, I finally decided, as a result of Mom, Marie Pritchard Snyder Sterling, all the things she was collecting in her basement in Lewiston, Idaho, and pictures and albums, and we probably had about 20 albums that she had started, and there were pictures in there, and she didn't finish. And she was always talking about, well, I'm going to put all of this together someday. So I took that and said, well, maybe we should do that. Had all of Mom's death passed away in 1990, and I had all of these boxes of materials of forefathers. Well, I decided to take advantage of it and put them together. So now at this stage of my life, I'm 81 years young, right? And I now am one of the oldest living members of my 4 clans. I call them the clans by the Snyder, the Cooper, the Pritchard, and the Jordan clans. You, Craig, you have another clan side, which you should maybe mention later on. So I decided to follow those and put them together because I knew all of them except one. I knew Walter Ison Pritchard, my grandfather. I spent time with, of course, John Wesley Snyder, my grandfather, the other grandfather. My grandmother, Jessie Lee Jordan Pritchard. And then my other grandmother, who passed away before my birth in 1927, Mary Cooper Snyder. And so I also thought about, well, maybe there's some interesting information about their past from a health standpoint and other things that future generations might want to know. So I really wrote the book, put the book together. Maybe Milton should go work in the woods, and I'll explain what that means later. I put it together so that future offsprings, say maybe 50 years from now, 100 years from now, might have an opportunity to see those pictures and to talk about our past. You did that really well, Craig, in talking about the clans that we have followed. And I also thought about all of those individuals, and there's no record really of them except their birth and their death. My grandfather and my 2 grandfathers, one was born in West Virginia and is buried in West Virginia. John Wesley was born in West Virginia and it's buried in Fraser Cemetery in Idaho, and so on. But very little information about them. So we put all of this in the book to try to help, because at this stage I probably knew as many of them as anyone growing up. I was born in 1929. Let me read you just one little thing from that point. I like it because it describes 81 years ago, okay? And I'm just going to read from the book, my birth. And it's kind of important because 81 years ago is somewhat important. I'm healthy and I'm here. The Model T Ford set out from Orofino, Idaho, on the banks of the Clearwater River, and crept slowly up the steep, curving, and icy Greer Grade. Some 25 miles up the Snowy Mountain gravel road through the Fraser community, Highway 11, east to the 3-mile road, and 2 miles south near the old OK schoolhouse, which of course no longer exists. The date was November 15, 1929, as Dr. Robertson drove his Ford from Orofino over the miles of muddy and rutted roads to the Lolo Ranch in order to deliver me into the world. I like to remind myself of that because at 29 and now 2011, a great deal has passed. And I dedicate the tape and the book. Of course, I dedicate the tape now to my sons. Brent Sr., Craig Cooper, Mark Albert, and Matthew Scott Snyder, because of what they're doing here today. We traveled from Seattle down to be with Matthew and his wife Elizabeth, and they're doing the taping at the Matthew Snyder's Snyder Recording Studio. So I'm really privileged to be here, and so I dedicate the tape largely to you all. In addition, though, I have to dedicate the tape to my mother, Marie, my dad, Milton Cooper, and my grandfather, John Wesley, Walter Ison, and Jesse Lee and Mary Cooper. And finally, to my wife, Dolores Gibbons, who urged me, pushed me to do the book over a period of 15 years, and to the boy's mother, E. June Snyder. I'm here as a result of that, and they were so supportive, and all of you have been supportive in doing that. My early days, of course, on the Lolo Ranch were few, because my dad and mom bought a farm on the Apker Ranch and Fraser, which is almost next door to the Fraser Cemetery, for Fraser Park. And so we moved there, and when I was about 3. And it's an important point about that particular period. I went to Johnstown School in the 1st grade, and I rode a horse to school. I described that in the book. And then we also had a home in Weippe. So my official birth residence is at Weippe. And we then moved our house on skids in the snow down to the Fraser farm. And so all those early years, up until 1942, when my father, Milton Cooper, passed away, I lived around with my grandfathers and my grandmothers on the farm in the Weippe, Fraser, and Johnstown communities. My dad, Milton Cooper, was a gyppo logger. He had trucks and horses and I was going to say cows, but we also had cows on the ranch. And
You have chickens?
And we had chickens and geese and ducks and turkeys and sheep and hogs and so on. But my dad, we owned a farm, and my dad also logged. And of course that led up to a period of his death when my mother made the decision to leave Weippe, and we'll discuss that later. But my early my early connection was with, of course, my grandfather, John Wesley, because I lived at his house almost as much as I lived at the farm in Fraser. So I also have to really dedicate my work to John Wesley, Grandma, because I lived around them, I lived with them. And we'll discuss some other features of that later on. I want to discuss the other relatives in my life at that time. My dad's brother, Willard, and my mother's sister, Agatha, and who also had 5 children, Keith. And Keith is one of my double first cousins, and he's very close to Keith. And my aunt, Lee, Ron Cockrell, is my other first cousin. I call him a double first cousin. And those people were very important to me, in addition to my dad's sister, Virginia. And Dad had disabled brothers and sisters, which I'll discuss later in detail because they were disabled, and I want to how much I loved them and how wonderful they were in my growing up years. But living on the farm and then trying to go to school, and finally went from Johnstown School to Weippe Elementary, and then I lived on logging sites where my dad was hauling logs, and my mom was taking me into Weippe Elementary School to go to school, and those were such rich experiences because I learned to hunt, and I learned to clean out the barn. I learned to milk cows, and
Maybe you learned the work ethic.
I learned to work ethic, yes. But the wonderful period of that time was I met many of my grandfather's brothers and sisters, the uncles and aunts, and my mother's father. And so it's really a great experience to be able to live through that period and know all of those people. And then another thing is my mother took us on a trip to, my mother and dad took me on a trip to West Virginia when I was about 10. And so I met additional relatives there at that point.
And that was 1939.
Yeah,
right?
3940, the winter of 3940. Traveling in a 1940 Ford.
Don't you think that's important because it, in a sense, it links the families present at that time in the 30s and early 40s to the past that is very, very closely related to West Virginia. The West Virginia-Idaho connection is really important, don't you think?
Right.
Because and it got you to go back. You were able to meet the old-time Snyders, the old-time Coopers, and the other families that lived back there at the time.
Yeah. For instance, one aside that I don't discuss much in the book are the Jordans, because the Jordans have written a great deal about their background, and so I just tried not to cover too much of that. But I remember on that trip to West Virginia in 1939 of walking over a bridge, walking over a kind of a draw swinging bridge over the river in West Virginia, and staying all night with Mom's uncle, Baxter, who lived at Anstrati, I think was her name, and they lived in a cabin in the hills of West Virginia. And I remember it so vividly because we slept on a straw mattress, so it was way back. So I had that opportunity. Baxter never moved to Wehi.
Was that in Job?
But that was and it was south of Job, really.
Okay.
South. They were all born in that area. I am glad you brought that up, because during that time I was able to visit Grandpa's, John Wesley's sisters. Stella was one of them, and Carrie, and stayed at their house. I even went to school for a few months. I was gone from school in 5th grade for about 3 or 4 months. I always attribute my lack of math training as being on the road in West Virginia that year, so on. But I met all of those people, those wonderful people from West Virginia who had created, all my forefathers. Now, my grandfather, and maybe we should discuss that right now. Why did they move to Idaho from West Virginia? Well, Grandpa, and Grandma came in about 1901 to the Orofino area, and they built a cabin on Phoebe Snyder Carr's ranch on Fords Creek. And that's where my father, Milton Cooper, was born. And that was before they moved across Fords Creek, came over to Johnstown, Idaho, and Grandpa bought a 160-acre farm, and cleared the woods, cleared the logs off the farm, and had hay and wheat and so on in that area.
Just for clarification, is that we've seen a house with J.W. Snyder and all the kids on their porch. Is that the location of that farm?
That's the house. They built in probably about it looks to be like 1908. My dad was born in 1904. Milton Cooper was born in 4. So it may have been 1910. My dad is pictured, he's standing on the porch with Grandpa, with his dad and mother. And yes, the barn is still standing. The big red barn at the John W. Snyder farm is standing. Also, my dad's barn is standing. It's on the front of my book, and they built that in 1938. So I was old enough to help pack lumber around, help them.
We've driven by that farm several times, and we've taken lots of pictures, and it looks really good. It looks like it was built maybe 20 years ago. It still is in really good shape.
One of the important things about Fraser is that John W. and Mary are buried at the Fraser Cemetery. My dad, Milton Cooper, and Marie, my mother, they're buried there, and many relatives. Fraser Cemetery, it's about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile off the road.
And over the years, you felt really compelled to help out with the maintenance of Fraser Cemetery because of that link to so many of your relatives.
Yes, and Fraser Park is nearby too. The old baseball games and the picnics and the wonderful thing.
Yeah.
It was 3/4 of a mile from the ranch.
I remember several times as a kid going to picnics that Nana would set up. We'd have a picnic, we'd go to Fraser Park, not really realizing at the time when you're a kid, you don't realize the connection to all the picnics that families had back in the day.
Right. I think the experience of living at the Fraser Farm and also in Weippe and at logging camps probably helped prepare me for a later stage of life, and that involves schooling and so on. But I'll probably go into that later on. My father was sick for about 2 years. At the time, we really didn't know what was wrong, but later on discovered that it was probably leukemia and cancer of the blood.
So it wasn't long after you came back to from the trip to West Virginia that he got sick.
Yes, he got sick in about 41, 42, and so on, and then passed away in Lewiston. And that was a major change of my life, because I was really leaving an area that that I knew so well. Also, once we left, of course, my grandfather left, also had sold the farm.
How soon after?
About a year later, 2 years later. But I wanted to cover that period of the life because of all of those people that I knew, all of the uncles and aunts of my mother, and I'm repeating myself here on this point, but Zan Jordan and Clint Jordan and John Jordan, my grandmother's brothers. I was around them, knew them really well, and then John's grandfather, John W.'s sisters and brothers, got to meet practically all of them. Well, one had died earlier in my life. Let me go back and say that my mother and father were married in 1925. Mom came to Weippe. She really more or less left. She was angry with Walter Eisen, her dad, and so she left by train. And I came out west to see her grandfather and grandmother.
Adonijah
and Amanda, who were living in Weippe. And so Mom came out early, and by train came in to Spokane and then down to Arrow, and then to Orofino. And I remember her saying that she really didn't know how to get to her grandfather's house, but her uncle, Zan Jordan, picked her up and kept her for a couple days until he was able to take her up to her grandfather's home, which was at the 4 Mile Corner area on highway. Is that Highway 11 or 12? Yeah, 12.
11.
11.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's how she arrived, and of course, immediately as a young person of 18 or 19, my dad, who was close in age, of course, marriage occurred at 1925, and then I have a sister that was born and only lived a few months, and she was buried at the farm in the grandfather's
and her name
farm.
Was Mary Alice.
Yeah, Mary Alice. Yes.
After her mom.
And then 4 years later, my brother, Melvin Delano Snyder, came along.
1934.
1934. And Mel passed away 2 years ago and lived in Pendleton, Oregon, one of the great partners of my life, the old bulldogger, I called him. But Mel and I grew up together, living during that period with Mom and Grandpa and my dad, and then my schooling. I went to Weippe High School for the freshman year, and that's an important story that maybe you might want me to cover later on why I wrote the book and what the name of the book. And
Why don't we do it right now? You can
Okay.
Just say.
Well, yeah, I was in. I had Mrs. Armitage for a teacher of algebra, and Weippe High School, which doesn't exist now. It's called Timberline High School, in between Pierce and Weippe. And Mrs. Armitage was the famous algebra teacher, who probably thought that only geniuses took algebra, because Milton Snyder was not one of her favorite algebra students. Okay? So I'll never forget the day that Mrs. Armitage called Mom in for a parent conference. And I think it was, maybe October. And I overheard them talking about Milton's lack of discipline in the area of algebra. By the way, I started reading when I was about 2 years of age because of my mother, so I was pretty well read by that time. But I overheard them talking about Milton. We just don't know. He just doesn't seem to grasp it, and so on. Well, as we left, Mrs. Armitage said, "Mrs. Snyder, maybe Milton should go work in the woods." Well, working in the woods was a great profession. My dad was one of the great loggers of all of the area, and wonderful. In fact, I have a picture of my dad and my grandfather with a logging truck with loaded logs. So it was a great profession. So there was certainly nothing wrong with working in the woods, because they were all making good money. She said, instead of going on to school, maybe Milton should go work in the woods. My mother said, Milton is not going to work in the woods. He's going to go to school. So my dad had passed away that summer, and that's when Mom, who had to sell all of our farms, our houses, all of the equipment, because she had to pay off the hospital bills in Lewiston and doctors' bills. I guess that's why I'm so adamant about health care for everyone, because we lost everything. And Mom remarried, married Albert Sterling, and kicking and screaming, I went along with her, and we moved to Lewiston, Idaho. And the reason probably is because Albert, her husband, could work in the mill. So we left. Well, as a result of that algebra class and Mrs. Armitage, who I almost can see today, I remember the dress she was wearing, because she had intimated that I was incapable of working.
Well, you knew something was up. She came to the house, right?
Yes.
I mean, she said they're not going to talk about knitting or anything. They're going to talk about milt. So
yeah,
you knew that you were probably struggling and.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, but Mom was not ready to accept this. I remember I was raised by one of the strong-willed women of the West, and who thought that everyone needed to go to school.
At this point, this is one of the things I've kind of gotten over the years doing the genealogy. Was I always kind of pictured our family as being like the first generation of family, you being that person, and Mom, June Snyder, being that person. The people that went to college and got a degree and sought a professional life. But really it was Nana's father, Walter Eisen, who had gone to Wesleyan University, West Virginia Wesleyan in Buchanan. And really that's kind of where she's coming from. She thought, she looked up to her father in many ways and had an interesting relationship with her father. But I think she thought that that's what the life that she wanted for her kids and her grandkids.
That's right. And when you talk about my mother, who you 4 sons know pretty well, my mother never left a stone unturned. My mother was working to find work every minute of the day, always talking about her dad and him being a famous minister in West Virginia and Illinois and Iowa. And she was always on my case. She was in my face half of the time. Every class I took, she knew about. Every girl I even winked at, she thought maybe I was going to get them pregnant.
Very few women, I'm sure. But
No, very few.
Yes.
Very few. But when I talk about strong-willed, I probably could have my son, the eldest. I could probably have Brent Sr. talk about his relationship with Marie over the years.
Well, I could say that if all the brothers were here, we could like change. You could start a 2-hour session on stories, Nana stories.
Right. Yeah.
Very strong person, and we all have memories. And
In fact, the famous story that your mother told about early in the morning and maybe 5 o'clock in the morning, if you stayed at Mom's house, remember one of the things you found that her tearing the.
You might be asleep in bed. And Mom just told me the story the other day. She said that she'd be asleep, and all of a sudden the door would open. She was in a daze, and the covers would go off the bed.
Going to wash the covers.
And she's going to watch this, and it's totally silent, totally unwritten. No one's saying anything, but the message was, you should be out of bed by now, shouldn't you? I mean, the covers are off the bed, and might as well get up at that point, because otherwise you're going to get
One other
get cold.
small story about Mom is that even later, when I was in the 10th grade in Lewiston, and girlfriends, and Mom would call the father of the girl if I had a date with them to try to find out where I was. You're trailing me.
Which I think was always probably a good thing, because we always had to kind of keep track of Dad, right?
Yeah, well, on that, one of the great things I did early in the wee eye period was learn to dance. Virginia, my Aunt Virginia, Aunt Lee, Agatha, they taught me to dance when I was about 5 years of age. And so why was it important to dance? Well, we went to the community hall in Weeip, and there were dances. I even went to dances in homes, in farmhouses, and where people would gather and have dinner on a Saturday night. So as a young guy, I learned to dance early because of my aunts, which helped me later on, because a lot of the guys when I was in high school, they didn't dance. So at least I always had dates anyway. But we're talking about probably the influence of schooling in my life has to be Mom, because, and we'll discuss that later when I talk about going to college, the first year of college, had to be Mom. And she was in my face about it. Every grade, every class. What have you done? When? Where? And why? And even the day I skipped school, Wayne Humphrey, my friend, and I skipped school as a senior at Lewiston High School later, and Mom knew about it that afternoon. And I couldn't even escape. I couldn't even skip school in the afternoon and get by.
Well, we should know something about that. Our dad was a superintendent, so we never could do anything wrong. Brent could attest to that, probably.
Yeah, Brent and you.
But I just wanted, maybe before we end this segment, to say that it just kind of hit me as we're talking that 1942, an important year, or 43, your dad died.
Yes.
But that was a transition in your life that I know from moving around as a kid a lot when I was growing up. But this was the first time you had a major transition in your life. So that was a big transition, too.
Well, talking about algebra, I love to talk about Mrs. Armitage in my algebra class in Weeip. But going to Lewiston as a sophomore, then we moved to Lewiston the next year. That following year. And I took algebra again and passed in a new setting. And I had made all these wonderful friends, and the teachers were great and so on. So it was almost like breaking
writing a new chapter.
A whole new chapter.
Clean slate.
Yeah, it was really great. But, your father dies in July, and the algebra teacher tells you that you're dumb in algebra that fall. And so you need new friends or new experiences to make it clear. I think because of that and because of Mom, that's probably why I have a PhD, why I continued to, I was almost obsessed with it, and it has to be largely because of Mom, because my dad wanted me to really be a logger, really. And I would have been if he had stayed alive, yes.
Did you think that they had talked about that, or they had disagreements over that?
No, I
when you were
don't think
growing up?
so. I think my mother was always talking about me being a minister or a professor or something like that. And so I remember going to downtown Weeip in the early stages to get groceries for Mom, and the owners of the store would say, "Hi, Professor," because so someone was pushing me from a standpoint that I didn't really understand, because they were all calling me professor at that time. And no one went to college from Weeip, Idaho at that time in those early stages, except a few. Mm-hmm. I was probably one of the first Snyder offsprings of my clan, of my John W. Cooper clan, the Snyder Cooper side to go, right? So I believe that stage changed my life. But after moving to Lewiston, I still, of course, had strong connections with my grandfather, John W. And that was through, we fished, we hunted deer and elk, and spent a great deal of my time. Well, one of the experiences with my dad was when he was ill, about 1941. I remember him killing an elk, a first elk, and with his 40-06, about 250 yards away, 300 yards away. That was so impressive to me. My dad was one of the kindest, nicest persons I ever met. And
that must have been a little bit of a juxtaposition when you think of his relationship with your mother. Your mother, very strong personality.
Strong personality, pushing him all the time. And he worked all the time. She didn't have to work to push him to work, because we had cows and horses and trucks and caterpillars, and that tied in with the logging business and the farm. And so Mom and Dad together were pushing each other. But my dad, of course, was ill and left us. And but I have to say, carried on probably the influence of this strong woman in my life, Marie. Wonderful woman. Craig and Mark and Brent and others have an old tape of Mom in the early stages that you may want to integrate into this film in some way or at some time, because it's
we had our first video camera in 1983. It came from your office. You brought it home one summer, and in 1983 we made tapes around the house. I think we had no understanding that we might watch it 30 years later and say, hey, look how silly we look. But we didn't really know what we were doing, but we certainly got a couple of sessions in with your mom, and I was really glad we were able to see your mom and Al, Grandpa, talk and speak about their lives, and it's great to hear their voices. And
I want to give credit again, I don't think I give enough, to Dad's brother Willard, who was wonderful to me in this growing up period, and continued to be. He lived a long time, and he's the father of Keith and Twyla. And I believe that Lee and Otis Cockrell and Lee, Mom's sister, were also tremendous influence. I also had some cousins that were very important that came out of that period that I knew really well. Joanne Smith, and who was the daughter of Clara, and Emmett Lee Bonner, the son, Emmett Lee and Jimmy, the son of Clara. I was very close to during that period, and there were a number of friends, but most of my friends I remember well. I became close to after I moved to Lewiston from that period. I'm trying to think about the fundamental thing about Dad and Mom and what they did for me. And my dad was his human behaviors. You know, I never remembered him even saying one thing cross to me. I'm sure that you four sons probably can't say the same thing about your dad, but
I think you picked up several characteristics from your mom.
Yeah, from my mom.
We got
yeah.
a little intenseness when we were growing up. You say, you clean that garage and you come out and then you'd show us how to do it right.
Yeah, that's right. But I believed. Oh, and the John Wesley, my grandfather. We never had one argument. Keith and Ron always wanted to know why he had a bullet in his neck. It was lodged in his neck.
I had never heard this until the last few
And
weeks. So.
he had received that as an early person in West Virginia. And no one really ever had a good question, a good answer to that. It could have been one of his girlfriend's boyfriends may have been instrumental in that. Or it was certainly after the Civil War, so we can't claim the Civil War as the reason.
Well, tell us how you discovered that he had a
I threw a clod. Yeah, I went working with him. He was plowing, I remember, and there were the clods and the dirt clods, and I was throwing them around the field. I hit him in the neck, in the back, and that's when I first discovered that he told.
He said a crossword.
He told the story. Yes, a few words that I won't discuss here at this point. But that was the story about John W. And some always said, well, it was one of the girlfriend suitors that got him, and so on. He and my grandmother were married in West Virginia, and Aunt Nola, the daughter, came out west with them.
Where were they married in
and
West
there
Virginia?
was, I think it was Oakton.
Oh, you mean he was married in Oakland, Maryland?
Oakland,
right across
Maryland.
the border.
Yeah, across the border, Oakland,
Yeah.
Maryland. They
Big,
were married.
yeah, kind of a big town
Yeah,
around.
That's
area.
right. And in the book, I have the will of Captain Sampson, grandfather's dad, and Craig has done a lot of work on and study of Captain Sampson during the Civil War period, and you may want to refer to that sometime if you're interested in it. Craig has a lot of information on the Snyder and the Civil War period in the fight between the North and the South. Remember, West Virginia broke away from Virginia, and the North, they were fighting cousins in West Virginia during that time. I also have another cousin very close to us, and that's Carolyn Dolly, Carolyn Snyder Dolly, and she is the granddaughter of Blaine, the youngest brother of John W.
Second
And
youngest.
pardon?
Henry was the youngest, right?
Oh, Henry is the youngest. I'm
So
sorry.
he was close to
Blaine.
Yeah.
Thank you on that point. But she lives in West Virginia, and I'm very close to. We're all close to Carolyn, and she gives us a lot of information. And she was very, very important to us in the writing of the book because she provided the will, the captain,
and several pictures.
And pictures, yes.
I think it's kind of important the connection with Carolyn's family because she actually lives in the house that Blaine built after the old house that he had. But he built this in the 30s, maybe. Is that correct? The Blaine.
When I visited West Virginia in 1939-40, I stayed at her grandfather's house, Blaine house, in the old
place.
Old place.
They call the old place.
Yes, the old Captain Sampson home is in Harmon. Is outside Harmon along the road. It's still standing. The old building that Blaine lived, and Blaine and Cora. Cora was my grandmother's sister. Yes, I lived at their home, Blaine's home, Blaine and Cora's home, but they now have moved. They moved over to.
So probably in the early 40s they moved over to
yes,
the highway.
Yes, Carolyn would probably, if she were here today, she would give us the exact date. But
right.
It was after I was there that they moved.
And I was just there this summer, and she shared with Sarah and I a present that J.W. had sent back to Blaine. It's on the wall. It's a picture, or it's just a glass framed portrait of two people, sitting in a parlor or something. But she remembered distinctly that Blaine had said that J.W. and Mary had sent this to them at a certain point.
Right.
So they had some connection over the years.
In the Harmon area, there is the Snyder Cemetery, right outside of Harmon. And the Cooper Cemetery is on the it's a couple miles out of Harmon also. I need to again say that my grandfather, Walter Eisen, is buried at the Masonic Cemetery in Weston, West Virginia. Went to school in Buchanan. His mother, father, and grandfathers are buried in the White Oak Cemetery outside of Harrisville, West Virginia. That's for the record. Anyway, I'm saying that. All of the Pritchard side of the family, Pritchard side, really lived more in the Harrisville. My mother was born in Harrisville, West Virginia, and the Pennsboro, Fairmont was, yes. In fact, the other side of my son, Craig Yu, went to Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, the same place that the grandfather, Walter Eisen, worked out of the Methodist United Brethren Secretary's office. He was assigned a church from Huntington.
One of the important things that we did later on, after we left West Virginia the first time, when we were living back in Virginia, West Virginia, you took us back on a trip to the places where your mother had lived and where their ancestors had lived, and one of the places was Harrisville.
Yes.
And we walked into the Harrisville courthouse, the Ritchie County courthouse, where they had a very large room with all the official records dating back a couple hundred years. And they had logs of books, and most of in the books there were logs of births and deaths and marriages and things. So we stand in front of this one book we found where Nana's Marie Pritchard's birth was recorded, and it was recorded in the book. And we opened the book, and it says in the book, Marie Alice Pritchard. And we noticed right away, we kind of smiled at each other and said, look at this. And the picture, the books was clearly written over in with a dark inked pen. And it was written in dark letters, Marie Alice Pritchard. And you could see underneath the letters, something you can't see in official records, but you can see in the original record. You can see that the original name Nana had was Mary Alice Pritchard. It was clearly stated that way. And I thought that was a great story. At which point, we had one of the what do you call her? The
caretaker.
Caretaker of the record house. She came in very angry, very upset with us, and said, "What is going on?" And she saw that we were looking. We were kind of laughing at the book, and she said, "Are you changing official records?" And we sat there. We started laughing. He said, "Well, it wasn't us. We just noticed that it's been changed." And she said, "Well, this is very, what did she say? This is a very important document, and you could get into big trouble for doing this." I said, "Well, the person who did this, I'm pretty sure, has been dead for a few years, and you can't get in trouble anymore." So, just one of the interesting aspects of Nana, where she wanted to be called Marie Alice, but she was born Mary Alice, and she named her baby. Her first child, Mary Alice Snyder.
The interesting thing about Marie Alice, she was born, by the way, January 11, 1906, in Harrisville. Okay, her dad was minister at the church. I believe that church has been modernized several times, but it's right there in Harrisville. And remember, the interesting part of that area is that we mentioned before, but for those later on who need to know this, that White Oak Cemetery is 1 acre, very small. It's hard to find. 7 miles out of Harrisville. Thomas and her grandfather Thomas and her great-grandfather
Peter.
are buried. Okay.
And one of the interesting things about that location of the cemetery is it's near Oxford, West Virginia. In doing research on it, I had put in my research online that this was part of Ritchie County, and I had someone write me kind of a nasty note and said, well, Oxford is in Doddridge County. So they had this big disagreement over, and I finally realized that really the cemetery is just outside Oxford, and that portion of the cemetery and the church, White Oak Church, is in Ritchie County.
Yes. Another thing, Mom did go to high school in Elkins, and I think graduated from Fairmont. Is that fair?
No.
She graduated.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but it was Iowa. She graduated in Iowa.
Oh, she did.
And as far as I know, she went to several high schools. So one was in Oakland, Maryland, and one was in Fairmont.
Yes.
And one was in Iowa. But we'll have to.
Let me take us down the freeway in West Virginia to Weston. My grandfather, Walter, lived in Weston with his brother in his later years. In fact, he passed away there. Bushrod. And grandfather, Walter Eisen, wrote Mom his famous penny postcard notes about she was either being mean to him or she wasn't helping him. And I think you and I went back there and visited Weston and talked to a woman who remembered grandfather sitting on the porch of the county courthouse or the city courthouse. It's across the street, or was across the street from the post office. Mm-hmm. And he would sit there and write notes to family members throughout the United States. That's where, and then he rests in peace at the Masonic Cemetery in Weston.
I think we have several of the notes near the end of his life when he wrote to his kids, which were all over at that point. And the notes we've had are to Marie.
Yes.
And he was kind of begging her for money to get help in the hospital.
He was poor. There was no money. And probably one of the reasons I have developed such a passion for health care, for everyone deserves health care, is both my dad died as a result of bad health care, and my grandfather, same way. And
well, for one of the notes, he mentioned that he didn't think that they were taking care of him. They said, well, I'm in this room, but they don't even talk to me anymore.
No one talks, yes.
And they said, I don't have any money, and they know I can't pay, so can you please send me some money? And we're not really sure if Marie sent any money at all.
Yes, she did send some money from time to time, yes, I remember. But she was always angry because Mom would be angry about penny postcards, and she felt that people were reading them in the post office.
And they probably were.
And they probably were, right. Yes.
So I think this brings us to this, again, this connection between Idaho and West Virginia has been important in our life. I don't think we realize the significance of moving back to Virginia while I was in high school and Mark and Matt were in junior high and elementary school. But we moved back to Manassas, Virginia. You took a job at Prince William County as a Prince William County superintendent. And but it was because of that connection to the East Coast that I was able to, and I know my brothers were able to kind of open up their world to the entire United States and realize that we had come from this other location. I had a girlfriend at the time, Kate Salavara, and her family had a cabin in Harmon, West Virginia, which turned out to be, and I did not know at the time, I'm 18 years old, and I was dating this girl during the summer after my graduation year, and we went to the cabin. It was borderline, where the cabin was right on the border of where the old Captain Sampson Snyder homestead property was. And we would go on hikes, and we'd run into Snyders, and later on, years later, we realized that now the person that owns that land that we were walking on the entire day is now Carolyn Snyder Dolly. And just kind of that irony of life where here I was introduced to that history of my family in a totally unknown way at the time. But now it's kind of linked me back full circle to the life cycle of our family in the United States.
Yes. By the way, anyone interested in the Snyder Cooper clan early history, the book has the will I mentioned earlier. The will, Captain Sampson's will, is in there in which he dedicated land, so much land, to all of the sisters and brothers. The Snyder 12. It's in that book that we should probably give credit to.
We'll give credit to the person that wrote that book. It was called Captain Snyder and His 12 of West Virginia. And that was a book that was written, I remember when I was in college, it was being written at the time. And Marie Sterling had given pictures to Carrie Harmon Roy, who was in Harmon, West Virginia. And I actually met her when I was going to college. And I didn't exactly know where she was, but Nana said, go and say hi to her. And I did, and she didn't really talk to me very long, but I don't think she knew exactly who I was. But that's an important book because it shows a lot of the history of the Snyders and the Coopers and the way of life during the old times.
Yeah, we need to give credit to that book.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, we were going to, I wanted to add one thing about the early years. I need to give credit to my aunts and uncles on my dad's side who were disabled. I'd just like to spend a little more time on that. Uncle Johnny and Aunt Myrtle were disabled, did not talk, had a hearing problem, of course, had trouble walking, and they were the son and daughter of John Wesley and Mary. And also Danny, who died when he was 15, was also one of the sons. And people at that time did not receive special training for being disabled. And if they had had an opportunity for training, they probably would have been talking. But they were raised on the farm. We loved them a great deal. And I want to make it quite clear that they're very intelligent in their way, and we loved them very much. And there was some type of birth defect or a gene problem, their birth defect, because there's never been any evidence of that trait carrying through with future offspring.
They thought that there's something with the Cooper marriage, with the Cooper family, with the Snyder family, because there was a similar offspring with Blaine Snyder's children.
Blaine and Cora. And they were, of course, Blaine and Cora's children. Ward and Roy were wonderful people. Everyone loved them. I knew them. Carolyn lived with them. Everyone was so kind to them, and they were quite similar to Johnny and Myrtle. And with additional training, I'm sure they would have been capable of doing a number of things. So I wanted to call attention to that. Some offspring someday may try to say things about them that were untrue. And I was raised with them, and if they had had additional training, education, it would have been helpful. Okay.
I've heard several people make mention of both sides of the family, whether it would be Carolyn's uncles or your uncles.
Yes.
Aunt and uncle, and that they were just fun to be around people. They were really nice people.
Yes.
They were gentle. They were kind. And the family, I think, looking back, again, not being involved in that, but the family treated them in such a respectful way. But even back in the time when some families might have hidden these kids. They were out playing. They were out with the family. No one was ashamed of them.
Yes, that's right.
And I thought just in the era that they were born and raised, that I thought that was quite unusual.
Yes, I just needed to mention that because I was raised with them, and I also, I think Carolyn Snyder Dolly feels the same as I do about this. We respected them so much, and they were a part of our family, and we loved them a great deal. Okay?
Well, let's go back to Idaho and your schooling in Lewiston and the importance
Oh,
of
the move.
the move to Lewiston.
Yes, the move. I think I need to stress the importance of having to sell everything. Mom had to sell everything, and she gave one of the farms to Harry Curtis because he had been taking care of the property. And Al Sterling, whom she had married, had an opportunity to work at the mill, and so we moved to Lewiston. And in the book, I discuss that. Mom borrowed $3,500 from a bank and bought a home at 1527 18th Street in Lewiston, Idaho.
But you think that the $3,500 she borrowed she didn't have anything from the farm?
We had no
They
money.
had nothing.
No money.
Yeah.
No money. People thought we had money, but no, she had much of the money left from selling the equipment, the trucks and the caterpillars, the dozer and the cows and the horses and the farms, and had to go pay hospital bills at St. Joseph Hospital in Lewiston. That's where my dad died. And he was in the hospital the last year, much of the year. So all that money went there. And so had no money, and she bought the house in Lewiston, and I started to school as a sophomore in the fall of, November, fall after leaving Weippe, and it was the most wonderful period of my life, is going to Lewiston High School and making new friends. A couple of them I've continued to stay in contact with, Wayne Humphrey, Wayne Lorraine, and Jack Woodland, who I went to Korea with, number of other friends, John Weinman and Charlotte Warden and Anime Sipes. I made all these friends, and it was such a wonderful place to be. And I started working at the mill part-time in Lewiston and going to high school. And that's when I joined the National Guard. was during my junior year of high school. We joined the National Guard.
Were you actually old enough to join?
Yes, I was old enough. I was 17.
You could do it then?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That's right. Well, the reason why did we join, of course, the draft was still on, and that was in 1946, when we joined. And if my friend Jack Woodland feels I made a mistake on the time, because we joined the same hour. We were together when we joined the National Guard down on the streets of Lewiston, which led to other things later on, which led to Korea, of course, later on. But we moved to Lewiston. My mother bought a truck, a 1.5-ton truck, and we used it to haul pea straw and grain, and that was a way of making a little money, extra money. My mom worked downtown at J.C. Penney's, and
see, I don't think I ever realized. I don't think I ever heard that story.
Yeah, she.
For very long.
My mom worked downtown at various times at various stores throughout.
I did not know that.
Yes, and also Mom said, "You need to get a job, sir," and so she forced me to go down to Stone's grocery store, and I got a job and cutting lettuce and candling eggs, and you know what candling eggs is, don't you?
No.
Well, you take the egg and you look in a light to see if it has a chick in it, or if it's good to eat.
Okay.
So I candled eggs, and that was one of the low points of my life, candling eggs, because I lasted about 3 months and decided it's the most boring job I ever had in my life. I loved working in the grocery store because we could eat things that were left over. That's the way we could eat. And so during that was in 46, 45, 46. And I had made a little mistake there. I was an entrepreneur in some ways. Cigarettes were really hard to. That was a big item during the war. So on, people couldn't get cigarettes. So I worked at the store, and And so I was selling cigarettes. They were supposed to have a permit to get them, and so I was selling cigarettes. And not selling them, but I was selling them through the store. I wasn't making money off of it myself, but I was older cousins and older friends that wanted to buy cigarettes. So the manager found out about that, and I got in trouble over that. And Mom decided that I needed to have a better place of employment, and that's when I started working part-time out at the mill.
So did you get fired?
No, I didn't get fired. I quit.
Okay.
I quit.
Okay.
Mom decided that I needed to quit. And another pressure point of my strong-minded mother. Okay, she decided I needed a better job than cutting lettuce.
So you had a few instances where Nana would make moves in your life, and you heeded them most of the time.
Yeah, right. In Lewiston, after graduation from high school, probably the fundamental move that Mom made. She took, I think she took the car away from me or something. She did that on a regular basis. If I did something wrong, if I stayed out late, Mom would remove my privilege to drive the car. But the high point of our relationship, she put me in the car. I graduated from high school in Lewiston, and she put me in the car, drove me over to Northern Idaho College of Education, and said, "You go in there and you're going to school. You're going to school. That's it." So I went in, walked up I really wanted to go back to Weippe and work in the mill up in Weippe because some of my cousins were making really good money.
Yeah, and they told you.
Oh yes, Emmett Lee and Jimmy and Joanne's husband, Ab Hansen. They were making good money. So I walked up the steps at the administration building at NICE and took a test and started going to class, and then continued my work at PFI, the mill. That's where Al was working. Al Sterling was working.
Did he help you get the job?
So I don't think so. I think the mill was hiring a number of college guys to work part-time. So the beginning of my life, it's the real schooling after algebra, after my famous algebra. By the way, I love geometry, but was
I noticed in
going to
college.
school.
I noticed in college your major wasn't algebra.
Yeah, it was not algebra.
I think that should
but
be said.
may I give attention to the fact that I now work as a consultant
Yes.
to NTN, the National Training Network, K-12. Algebraic thinking, and Dr. James Hager and Nicole Beck hired me to be their consultant, and I represent at this stage of my life, a math company.
That's awesome. I think it should be noted here. You can cut this out later if you want to, but I think that one of the things I've noticed about my father, I was probably about 20 years ago, or a little over 20 years ago, you retired from education. And I think various times during the last 20 years, I've always said, "Hey, Dad, you should probably, why don't you retire from all these jobs you're getting, and you could play golf more and this and that and the other." I've finally given up, realizing that this man here, my father, has lived his life as a worker, got the work ethic in him, and probably on his last day of life will be signing papers to be reimbursed on a job. And it's to me it's been an inspiration in the sense that you think of life as not something where you get to a place where you stop working. It's something that you do your entire life, and it keeps life interesting, and it's certainly been inspirational for me.
I need to give credit to the college. I received a BA in the spring of 1951, and the National Guard, the Army called and activated us, and I headed for Korea. And the highlight of my life is getting that degree, and I left a month or two early because they wouldn't let me stay for graduation in the spring of 1951. And June, your mother, June Brown Snyder, walked across the stage at Northern Idaho College of Education to get my degree, and that was the springboard for going on. I then left and went to to Korea, of course, and was probably one of the few outside of the captain of our battery in the 300th Armored Field Artillery Battery. There were only two of us that had graduated from college, and by that time I was 21, 22 years of age. But that schooling propelled me into another stage. When I wrote the book, I did a book lecture, which Craig, you were at part of it, in Lewiston. The college is now Lewis Clark State College, and the president, Tony Fernandez, is now the official president, and the former president, Dean Thomas. I asked him, I said, I would like a diploma from Lewis Clark State College. I have one from Northern Idaho College of Education, and so the highlight of my life is they gave me a new diploma.
Which you have both of them on your on your wall.
I have both of them on my wall, but going to school at Northern Idaho, getting a BA, doing cadet teaching at Garfield School and the lab school on campus, and working at the mill. It was the fundamental stage of this schooling process which caused me to want to go on, so on. But after Lewiston, I married your mother in 1951. She'll probably say no, in 1950, but we were married in Lewiston at the Presbyterian Church across the street from Lewis Clark State College. And I was activated and went to Korea directly from the college campus, so on. But because of that BA that I had earned, it helped me a great deal in the Army, because I taught and did some educational training in Fort Carson.
I think what we can do right now is maybe go into a little bit of the Korea experience, and you eventually earned the rank of First Sergeant.
First Sergeant.
And you were in charge of what?
Okay, in Korea, I was I was destined to be a lecturer in their information education department, but I had an MOS of gun sergeant. So on the way to Korea, in the boat, Jack Woodland and I were together, and Jack taught me how to be a gun sergeant because I'd had very little training in that area. And so when I arrived in Korea, arrived at the 300th Armored Field Artillery Battalion in A Battery, and I was gun sergeant of gun number 1, which is called the Lucky 7, and it's on the picture, the Veterans Affairs picture. I have a picture of it in my book, and became first sergeant because the first sergeant had been removed, and I became first sergeant at 22 years of age in Korea. And I think, and your mother worked at Boeing while I was overseas. I think the importance of that phase of my life, which I was really, really into. I was really a loyal soldier, and went through the battle of a number of battles in North Korea. And it wasn't until I returned that I realized what my philosophy was. I was gung-ho at the time, but then I realized things weren't going well. Things didn't go well there. We divided Korea in half, and there was kind of a war mentality thing that emerged, in my view. And I wanted to express this in the book and didn't, and I should have, but this is my opportunity. I believe that that I was caught up in a kind of a war mania. I call it a mentality issue, is that everyone goes to war and everyone grabs the gun and invades another country and so on. As a result of the Korean experience in the north, especially in the northern mountains of Korea, I realized that it was almost similar to what we were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, Afghanistan and Korea resemble so much. almost the same because of the mountains. And so when I came back and from Korea and started schooling, working on my master's degree at the University of Washington, and I realized that I had changed. I had changed totally in regards to it, which caused that at the present time a feeling that how long are we going to continue this this war issue of running into countries and taking over. And right now this day or this week we're into a third area, Libya. We're not in there on the land, but I just have developed such a strong critical view of where the country's going in regards to the number of troops that we have in different countries. I think at one time someone described that we were in 135 countries.
I think over a period of time, I've heard you mention the relationship between the fall of the Roman Empire. You want to kind of relate those two together? I think I've heard that more than one time.
I like the kid about we're similar in many cases to our forefathers, beginning with of course the Romans were one, and then going to the French and the Germans and the English, the Brits. The fall of the Roman Empire lasted about 400 years. And they spread their troops out so far that they couldn't feed them. And I've always kidded people about that the United States is in the 300-year category. And we spread our troops so far out in so many countries that are we in danger of being similar to the Roman Empire. How long can we continue to do this? Because I've become, as a result of this, I then studied my world history. I feel that the President Obama, whom I supported this president election, I feel he hasn't read world history. I know that Bush didn't. I don't think Clinton did either. I think Eisenhower had a better grasp of it than and I supported Eisenhower as a president and as a general. I did not support the great general, the tank general, Patton, who Patton said, Americans love war, they love it. And I thought, Eisenhower was not of that mold. Eisenhower felt that we needed to stay out. So why do I compare the United States to the Romans? Because we spread our people all over the world. How long can we continue to feed them? So on, and serve liquid to them, and then cut education and health. There are 30 million people in this country right now that don't have a health plan. 30 million people. There are kids that aren't able to go to school. There are kids who are not in kindergarten. In Prince William County, when I was superintendent, I opened kindergarten in Prince William County in 1975. That late. But back to the war issue. I know that people kind of kid me about it, but I just feel that we're in the same trap as the Romans. The Romans were all over the globe. I was in Turkey last year, down on the Mediterranean. And a beautiful, beautiful area in the southern coast of Turkey. And the walls are down there. The Romans were building walls along, trying to keep enemy from attacking from the small ships. So I have become very pessimistic. I've become, someone might call me a liberal kook or so on, in regards to war. I believe that even the women, mothers, are involved in it. Everyone dresses up and they go to war. They march off and then they march back. And those who are dead and left on the battlefield, they never come back. They're on the hill. Now, I believe in defense, that we need to be very defensive. We need to protect our soul, our shores. But I also don't connect patriotism with going to war. I believe that if I'm opposed, I have the right to oppose it. I opposed totally the Iraqi war in 2003. I was in Italy at the time when when the French and the Italians were saying, "Don't do it," pace, signs on every apartment house, peace, and so on. And we strike Iraq, and then we strike Afghanistan, and people were this week they were killed in Afghanistan. I am asking for people to use good sense. In The Bridge of the River Kwai, the movie, it's an old movie that I love because the British colonel was building the bridge for the Japanese, and we destroyed it. They destroyed it, and the Brit was saying, and this British colonel was marching across the bridge and trying to save the bridge from being exploded by the Brits, and he was saying, "Is he insane?" Well, I sometimes think of that with us. Are we insane? How many troops do we want to die in Afghanistan? Because there is no way there will be victory in the hills, the mountains of North Korea or Afghanistan. Well, that's a long lecture on the subject of war.
We got to hear your explanation, and it's something that happens in every generation. You have to look at this and look at all sides.
Well, look at the French. The Brits. They tried to control the globe with their big ships. Think about what happened during that period. And the Portuguese have been in it. The Italians people have tried to take over. The Russians, and of course the famous German, Hitler, said that he could rule the world too, and we stopped him. But let's get together. Let's resolve our conflicts in different ways at the table, rather than building new armament, new tanks, new supersonic jets. This is ridiculous. This globe is only so small. We just can't. There will be 7 billion people here on this globe soon. That's enough of the lecture.
Okay.
Okay.
So you went to Sunnyside, which was important to our family because all 4 sons were born at the hospital there.
That's right.
And but let's talk about what happened after how long you taught and then what went on after.
Well, I was a principal in Sunnyside, and then we went to Richland. We moved to Richland, and I was principal of Carmichael School, secondary school, and then from Richland we went to Anacortes. As I was superintendent in Anacortes, Washington. Superintendent then went to Marysville, superintendent, and then left Marysville to go to San Diego to get a doctorate. That's where I got my PhD. And I also taught at the university after I graduated, and then went from San Diego to Manassas, Virginia, as division superintendent of Prince William County, Virginia. And then came back to Oakland, in the West, as deputy superintendent in Oakland City, Oakland, California. Before then, we moved back to Federal Way, and I became superintendent of schools in Federal Way, Washington. Okay? That trip, the bright spot about it is that I was able to meet all of these people and help, and I'm proud of what we did in all those districts. Probably the minor point is all you guys had to move so much and be in different schools.
Well, I always remembered that when we did move, you would always say, well, we'll wait till the end of the school year. You'd always let us finish a school. So I was able to go to 3 different high schools. I went to school in Marysville, Pilchuck High School, was the vice president of the freshman class, and then went to Poway High School, and then graduated from Stonewall Jackson High School. One of the ironies of life is I graduated from a Confederate high school after being born and raised on the West Coast. But all my brothers can, at this point, chip in where all the schools they went to. So there's a downside and an upside to that. The downside is you you move on from old friends, and the upside is that you learn to adapt and learn to have other friends, to learn new friendships, and to be able to move on. I really wouldn't change it for anything, although I do think occasionally that I would like to know some of those people that I left behind along the way.
You haven't been to too many class reunions, right?
I've went to 3 different high schools, and I've thought about going to every single class reunion, and I've never gone to any.
Never gone.
I'm wondering if any of my brothers have gone to any class reunion. I haven't heard of any.
Right.
I did go to a class reunion in 1994, but it was the Anacortes High School class
Yeah.
reunion, the one I would have graduated from when I was in middle school or junior high school there, and I went there and I was able to get, I think, out of my system, getting to see old friends, and had tears and went through all the histrionics of that. So that's all I'll say on that. We can cut that out.
One of the pluses of this whole point is that I'm most proud of all you guys going to school. I mean, that's right now we haven't named the fact that Matthew has this great recording company that he owns and runs here in Burbank. You are a teacher, a music director at Seaholm High School in Bellingham, Washington. Mark is with Boeing, working on, I'm not sure what plane he's totally working on every time I talk to him, but he's an engineer with Boeing. And Brent Snyder, the eldest, my namesake, is very active in the Seattle area, chemical dependency, and he's a specialist in the state of Washington with the PAC group right now. So I'm really proud of you guys for the schooling. I think maybe my schooling probably may have helped influence some of that.